With that, I welcome David.
Hey, Matt. It's nice to see you this morning. Thanks so much for moderating today.
Absolutely, my honor. So first, let's just talk about sort of the landscape we're in right now. ASGCT's quarterly report gave us a helpful snapshot of how the gene cell therapy pipeline is evolving. From your perspective, what trends are you seeing right now?
Well, we're seeing a couple of trends. A few things that we saw this last quarter of 2025 that were really encouraging. A few areas that were not necessarily concerning, but things that we want to watch, and then a few other areas that were also really encouraging. So what I mean by that specifically is we had a few regulatory approvals around the world, and we track through this report the traditional, or what people think of gene therapies when they think of ASGCT. So the more traditional gene therapies. We also track gene-modified cell therapies that are not genetically modified, and other RNA-mediated therapies as well. So across those sectors, we saw over the quarter 3 different approvals. One of which was in China, and this was an approval of a CAR T therapy. And in the United States, we saw an approval of Weskira, which is, of course, a genetically modified cell-based therapy for Wiskott-Eldridge syndrome. And that was really exciting for a number of reasons. First, because a gene therapy is going to reach patients that certainly need it and can benefit from it. And also because it was the first approval of where the drug development company, the sponsor, was a nonprofit institution. So that was really exciting and something that we were really encouraged to see. We also saw, now the areas that were a bit concerning, is we saw a slight decline in the total number of gene therapies that are in development right now. Still more than 2,000, but about a 4% decrease quarter over quarter. So we're watching this very carefully to see if this is a trend. We've not seen a decline in the total number of therapies in development for a very long time. So this is something that we definitely want to keep watching. And then more encouraging news to sort of bookend the story a little bit is that startup financing for gene therapies improved quarter over quarter. And ASGCT, which sits at this nexus of science and industry, we watch very closely and report on the startup financing. So to see programs as they typically leave academia and move into biotech or pharmaceuticals. And there we saw more than $550 million invested in the quarter across 14 different transactions. So a pretty significant increase quarter over quarter, which is, again, really encouraging for the sector.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a good trend that we're moving towards. Quick question for you. Because things look to be trending up, are there opportunities, do you think, for patient advocacy groups to interact with specific players to try to take advantage of this momentum?
I absolutely think that there are. I will tell you, every time I interact with a biotech or a pharmaceutical company, the discussion has some component that centers on patient interaction, patient advocacy involvement. So I know that there's a strong appetite definitely on that side of the table for patient groups to get involved and really help work together to advance cell and gene therapies. It's not just the company that makes it happen. It's not just the researchers. It's not just the patient advocates, but it really is a complete ecosystem. So yeah, I would definitely say that there are opportunities out there that on the patient advocacy side we should be pursuing.
And ASGCT recently launched the CGTxchange, which I think probably will help with this. Super interesting concept that's been described as a clearinghouse and marketplace to facilitate development. Can you walk us through a simple example of how the CGTxchange might work in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about this sort of a vignette, but also a generalized example so that we can understand it more completely. And this is really the typical kind of transaction or assistance that we considered when we were starting to develop this idea. So the concept really is around cell and gene therapies that have been deprioritized or work just dropped from development by primarily from biotechs, but also in some circumstances by pharmaceutical companies for approved therapies already. So the concept really is that CGTxchange will catalog and list in its clearinghouse any and all cell and gene therapies that fall into this category. So working with, let's just say, a biotech that is incapable for commercial reasons of continuing on a therapy. And so we're working with those biotechs to bring this program into the exchange and into the clearinghouse. So what we'd like to do is coordinate with that biotech and have permission to list, and then that program will come into the clearinghouse. And by that, what we mean is a listing of the program, description of the program, and all relevant documentation that we can receive from the company that presently owns it. What we do then is put it into the clearinghouse, and we have some sophisticated AI tools from partners at a company called VibeBio that we're working very closely with to perform an analysis of about 8 different categories of risk and understanding of the program. So regulatory risk, market risk, clinical safety risk. The AI tools then will digest and summarize the status of that program so that a viewer who's in the exchange and looking at this can very quickly look at the program and better understand what the cell and gene therapy is targeting, where its opportunities are, and where some of its challenges may exist. And the goal there is to be able to just, again, very quickly understand the status of this program and make a determination of, if you're on the viewing side, whether this is a program that you're really interested in learning more about and potentially supporting or taking over from the initial company that owns it. So into the clearinghouse, individuals, companies, nonprofits, academics have the opportunity to view this program and determine whether they want to look at it further. And from there, if an institution does, then they can enter into an agreement with the owner of the program, a confidentiality agreement, so they can start to really dig in and do their due diligence. So not just relying on the brief summaries from the AI-enabled tools that we have, but to really look at it more completely. And at that point, through the marketplace component of CGTxchange, this program then moves into private data rooms where parties can go in once they've signed that confidentiality agreement and start to really understand, review, and assess the program more completely, all within CGTxchange. And if a match is made, then there's the opportunity to acquire, license, or partner with this program to move it forward clinically. And at that point, the program would leave the exchange in the hands of the new entity or new entities that are moving it forward. So one of the ways that my colleague at our partner OTXL, Craig Martin, has described this as a Zillow for cell and gene therapies. So the opportunity to take a look at the market, to understand very quickly, like you might when you're looking at a real estate listing, what does this place have to offer? What work needs to be done, what work doesn't need to be done. And then from there, moving into the transaction phase to determine whether it's an asset that somebody wants to move forward with.
It's an interesting analogy that you use. How will information get into CGTxchange? Is it a combination of you guys going out and finding opportunities and entering into the system? Mm-hmm. Or is it also people coming to you and saying, hey, we have this thing, we'd love to get some exposure?
It's both, and both are happening at the same time. When we first ideated this, we had done a landscape analysis of deprioritized programs, and we very quickly came up with several dozen. We were about 60 programs by our count, maybe a few more at that point. And at the same time, Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator, OTXL, was doing the same sort of analysis from their perspective, which as a nonprofit biotech model, they were shopping for deprioritized assets. And so looking at this, they were able to identify this group of assets. And so we've got a discrete list of assets and the owners of those assets that we're reaching out to right now to try and bring those assets into the exchange. And at the same time, since we announced CGTxchange and since we've put the website out there, CGTxchange.com, we have received a number of inquiries organically from academic institutions, from other owners of IP that are looking to divest or partner with their programs in order to move them forward clinically. So it's coming in from both angles.
Is there any cost associated with using this?
There will be some modest costs associated with using this. The nice thing about this program is it's being run through two nonprofits. So our goal is not to enrich shareholders. Our goal is to make this a sustainable tool that benefits the entire field. So our revenue models at this point are really just targeting that sustainability of the program. So there will be modest fees that we request for listing on the exchange. There would be modest fees assessed to be a shopper on the exchange. And then we're researching and modeling modest fees for any transactions that are completed through the exchange. And again, everything modeled based on sustainability of the program only.
And we actually just answered one of the questions that came in on accident, okay. Which is great. So there's another question that just came in,
sure.
Which is, can any nonprofit, come to the exchange and ask questions? And in
Absolutely.
addition to that, is the AI interactive where someone can come in and say, hey, what else is going on with this program?
So the answer to the first question, which I interrupted you a little bit, sorry about that, is right. Yes. We are taking all comers at this point. So we would very much like members of this community and even broader than this community to be involved with the exchange. I think that the sky is the limit for what the exchange can do to benefit the space. As far as the AI tool, it's a closed system AI, and the information that is fed in is analyzed and output. So right now on the clearinghouse side, there is not an opportunity to modify or ask additional questions on that, as far as I know. But it is, again, because this is a new model, this is something that we're actively receiving feedback on what we can do to make it the most usable tool and most beneficial tool. But the quick answer to that question is it's not something that's manipulable by a user.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions came in.
Sure.
One of them is there a mechanism in the exchange of request proposals for significant need? And maybe I'll ask this in a different way. Is there a way to sort of rank them where this has a significant, clinical need or patient need, and we think that we want to get this out there more than let's say others?
There is so at the moment we are compiling programs into the clearinghouse. There will be a universe of programs that at the outset I think will be very easy to sort and determine that need. As the exchange grows and as the clearinghouse enlarges in size, there are search tools that can be applied to be able to search and sort programs based on one of those categories is the potential market size, patient need.
That's great. And it sounds like a good opportunity for people to comment on if there are additional fields that would be useful to sort by as this continues to grow. A couple more
Absolutely. I think,
questions have come
yeah.
in. So one of them, I think you just sort of touched on, which is that some programs are probably in that clearinghouse because they're seen as commercially unviable. There's a variety of definitions of what that means. Can you comment on how ASGCT or even the larger cell and gene therapy sector is addressing the large unmet need in these regions, and how this clearinghouse can sort of help bridge the gap for commercially unviable programs?
Well, when we look at this, we've deliberately used the phrase commercially pre-viable. And Matt, I think when we talked about this before, I had mentioned that we applied that label and we said we'll probably come up with a different name as we start to talk about these programs. But we didn't. In fact, we couldn't come up with a better phrase because it really encapsulates how we feel about these programs, is that they only lack commercial viability now, or they only lack commercial viability in a narrow traditional approach to commercial viability. There are other models where these programs make sense financially. And there are some investors, funders, and sponsor models that don't have the same market pressure and demand that biotechs that are traditional VC funded, or publicly traded pharmaceutical companies, or even privately owned biotechs and pharmaceutical companies might have. And they can sustain a very different revenue model. So a large academic institution, for instance, might be able to sustain a very different financial model for Wiskira than a biotech or traditional pharmaceutical company has. And that the commercial viability then lies in the different definition of commercial. And so we think that as we look outside typical and traditional investment in the space, there are certainly other investor types that may be able to produce revenues or sustain net or sustain losses in a way that really meets their mission. So this will bridge that gap by identifying sponsors and investors and funders that are outside the typical. And by doing so, we think that we're going to be able to match more programs that might not fit in the traditional, but fit in the non-traditional.
And can you remind me how many drugs are listed currently versus how many diseases are represented currently? And then as that continues to grow, are there mechanisms in place to send updates at regular intervals to people that might be interested?
Yeah, well, we're building the asset database right now. And so what we have at CGTxchange is a mock-up of a program, so that you can see an example of what's listed. And what we're doing behind the scenes right now is actively going out and recruiting sponsors to submit programs into the clearinghouse and be able to publish those a little bit later this year. So I can't provide any real-time updates as to how many programs are in the exchange right now or in the clearinghouse, because we're building that so we're attempting to go out and pound the pavement and let everybody know what this tool is that we're building, while we're putting information into the tool itself. And while I was talking, I actually forgot the second half of your question. Would you please remind me? I'm sorry about that.
Just if there is a mechanism in place, or there is an envisioned mechanism where people can sort of either query or get automatic updates to, hey, we added 5 new programs, or there's 3 new drugs.
So yes, we will be notifying, and this is of the community. And this is one of the wonderful things about this being a program of ASGCT as well, is that connection will put the full power of ASGCT behind announcing and letting people know within our own community what's going on here. So I would absolutely envision that in publications like our member newsletter, The Vector, on our website, asgct.org, or in our patient advocacy newsletter, that these are places where we're going to be announcing and publicizing what's happening within CGTxchange.
There is another question about sort of where the data, I think, comes from, and specifically with prevalence, because I think depending on the way you look or define prevalence, it can look, a little bit different. And so, did you use the prevalence estimates for the people that came to you and said, "Hey, we have this program," or were those cross-referenced to different sources as well? And I think that does get kind of at the commercially viable definition as well.
That's a great question. And I'm really glad that people are thinking about it this way, because we're doing both components of this. So number one is we take a program in and we are assessing it based on the information that's been submitted and our understanding of the space. So these the description of the program is generated through CGTxchange. And it's generated based on an assessment of the documents that are submitted and the understanding of the space. There is also a component for the company or the owner of the IP to provide a description in addition to the CGTxchange. And the goal there is to be able to provide realistic and reliable information about the program. But the holder of the IP now, who if they're in the exchange is interested in divesting it, might want to call attention to specific components. And I would consider, prevalence might be one of those, or potential prevalence or market impact, or the competitive landscape. Those might be components where there's information that is either different or described in such a way by either CGTxchange or the holder of the IP, just slightly differently.
So I have to say, David, we've got a lot of really great questions. It seems like there's a lot of excitement for this program. Yesterday, when Dr. Flotte kicked off the event, he also shared some additional efforts from ASGCT, including the ASGCT Foundation and a developer consortium. Can you explain how those pieces connect and why ASGCT thought now is a good time to launch them?
Sure. So let me start with the developer consortium, because that's intrinsically tied to the CGTxchange and the effort that we were developing to affect commercially pre-viable cell and gene therapies. So with understanding that we've got a brief amount of time, I won't do the full history, but we started about 2 years ago looking at this program. We pulled together a workshop and several dozen experts in the space, and we laid out a matrix that we published in Molecular Therapy of different solutions and different solution providers. We looked at that matrix and identified some spaces where ASGCT could participate. One of those was CGTxchange, the other of which was putting together this consortium of developers of ultra-rare gene therapies and potentially manufacturers and other service providers who would be interested in providing like cost or cost plus services to those ultra-rare developers as a way to maximize need and capacity, and to help elevate those companies that are willing to help and elevate those developers of cell and gene therapies for these ultra-rare conditions, of which most of these are in this non-traditional setting. So patient advocacy organizations, foundations, and others that are developing. So that consortium is being built out right now. And Dr. Steve Gray, who's a member of our board and well known to this community, I believe, is leading that effort on the ASGCT side. The foundation is slightly different, but we see this, again, as I mentioned before, it's an entire ecosystem, and we feel strongly that the foundation fits into this. So the foundation that we are announcing and that we are celebrating at our annual meeting with our first gala, where all proceeds of the gala will go directly to support the foundation's programmatic efforts. ASGCT will be covering all the operational costs, and the money that we raise through the gala will be going directly to these programs. What the foundation is going to be supporting is research, translation, and direct patient access to provide universal access to cell and gene therapies. So what we're looking at doing there are entertaining research projects that speak specifically to patient access, looking at ways that we can help fund or support translational efforts, particularly those that are maybe don't have the same commercial opportunities, and then also looking at what are the barriers to access either in trials or in approved therapies particularly in ultra rare disorders. And what can we as a community through the foundation, through the charitable foundation, do to help provide access? So that's really what the foundation will be doing. And because it's a separate entity that ASGCT is helping to found and support, it can be laser focused on those issues.
As an extension of that, what do you see as the opportunities for patient advocates to engage with these consortiums? And what do you think are the nearest term benefits that we can expect to see to demonstrate that these are working?
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to engage the patients to understand what the need is. So if our goal is to reduce barriers to access, we need to know what those barriers are. And the best way to do that is to learn from the patient communities that are facing those barriers. Please tell us what's standing in the way and what can we do to alleviate that. And I think that there's probably a lot of relatively small things that ASGCT Foundation can do to help alleviate some of those barriers. I know that travel to clinical trial sites can be really challenging. Time away from home, it's an enormous sacrifice and commitment from patients and their families to participate in these trials. And there are, I'm sure, ways that the foundation can help support individuals through this process. Longer term, when there's more funding, and of course we love to help have these communities help amplify what's going on in the space, which will help our fundraising efforts. We'll be looking at what we can do to fund efforts to translate cell and gene therapies and alleviate some of those financial barriers or constraints to help make it go faster and easier.
Thank you, David. Believe it or not, we're already at the end of the session.
Oh my gosh.
Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
What I'd really like to say is thank you so much to all the attendees who are here, everybody who registered and who's viewing this online now or later on demand. This is an incredibly important effort for ASGCT, and I'm so grateful for you and your participation in this process. I'd also like to say a special thanks to you, the other faculty, and the staff who are over here on the computer screen running everything behind the show. So thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you, David. Thanks for sharing your insights on these new initiatives that are aimed to support patient communities.